is a fetish? What is a kink? And what does it mean to be a fetishist or to be kinky? And why do some people who all claim to be fetishists seem to see what that means as something so radically different from one another? And why is this a fight that will inevitably break out on FetLife every couple of years? Honestly, because language is complicated and confusing and not always as specific as we need it to be. But the good news is there is actually a proper definition of fetishism that can help explain these differences and help our own understanding of our own kinks and fetishes better. So let's talk about optional, preferred, and obligatory fetishes. I'm Princess Kelly, and this is Spanking University. So the majority of this information is sourced from a conversation I had with the brilliant host of Sexplanations, Dr. Lindsay Doe. In a random turn of events, I ended up having dinner with her in Boston a few years back, and she introduced me to this framework, which appears to be sort of the current understanding of fetishism in that sort of sex education community. So I cannot take credit for the basic structure here, just the descriptions and the conclusions. So let's start with the basics. What is a fetish? Fetish is the colloquial term for paraphilia, or the experience of sexual arousal to atypical objects, situations, fantasies, behaviors, or individuals. You'll find that a lot of kinky people don't like the term paraphilia, as it has a history in psychiatric and medical uses. You know, back when we all just would have been seen as sexual perverts who had mental disorders. You know, the good times. But technically, this is still a good definition of what we would consider today to be a fetish, a sexual interest in an atypical object, situation, fantasy, or individual. So, well, what does that mean? Basically, do you find something hot that isn't specifically sexual? Things like spanking, bondage, rope, feet, tickling, balloon popping, humiliation, pain, food. The list is endless. Like think about the FetLife page that lists fetishes. Like that sort of endless. So, do you find one of those things hot? Congratulations! You have a fetish. But wait, you might be thinking, I'm into spanking. Like, really into spanking. Really, really, really into spanking. But I'm also into rope, but like not in the same way. How could those both possibly be fetishes? How could they possibly be the same thing? Well, while they both are fetishes, they're not exactly the same thing. And that's because fetishism can be divided into three categories: optional, preferred, and obligatory, which is sometimes also referred to as exclusive. So let's define what those mean, starting in reverse order. An obligatory fetish is what I have, and probably what a lot of you have. Someone who has an obligatory fetish, that fetish is the entirety of that person's sexual orientation. Someone for whom sex or sexual interest might not be possible without that fetish. In my experience, I've found that most, but not all people who define themselves as spankos are obligatory fetishists. Having an obligatory fetish is, as Jillian described so well in her video on spanking as a sexual orientation, it is functionally that, a sexual orientation. It is lifelong, unchanging, all-encompassing, and obligatory. If your fetish feels sometimes like it consumes you, it's probably obligatory. If you can't have sex or even sexual thoughts or interest in anything without thinking about your fetish, it's probably obligatory. An obligatory fetish is just that. Obligatory. Required. An obligatory fetish is a sexual interest in an atypical object, situation, fantasy, or individual that you must engage with. Now, let's go one step away from that and talk about preferred. A preferred fetish is a sexual interest in an atypical object, situation, fantasy, or individual. You might find you're going to hear that phrase a few times. That you would prefer to engage with, but don't have to engage with. So I give a couple of examples of this, and I feel like it's only fair to use myself first. So I think a lot of people might have noticed or be able to tell that I have a bit of an age gap fetish. So genuinely for this video, I went and calculated the average age gap between myself and my various boyfriends, daddies, partners, people that I've had over the years. And the average age gap is 20.6 years. So they were on average 20 years older than me. My husband is 21 years older than me, and my girlfriend is 12 years younger than me. So I think it's fair to say that I have a bit of a thing for an age gap. But that said, I didn't know that about myself when I was young. I know I was into spanking, but I didn't ever think about age gap relationships or pairings. I always fantasized about a guy my own age. I sort of just kind of fell into the whole daddy thing the first time I played. I have dated men my own age, or men who were like a conventional amount older than me, like 1 to 4 years. And I was attracted to them. Very much so. But I didn't find them as attractive as I find older men. So like one way I can describe this is if I think about like the actor Mark Harmon, and I think about when he was young, when he was like People Magazine's sexiest man alive, and I look at those sort of pictures and I'm like, yeah, you are hot. I would like to be spanked by you. But then I look at Mark Harmon as Gibbs and I'm like, yes, please, daddy. This is a preferred fetish. I don't technically have to be with people that are older or younger than me. I, for most of my life, assumed that I would end up with someone age appropriate and have dated people my own age. But I would prefer to be in an age gap relationship. Another example of a preferred fetishist is my girlfriend Flora. So Flora didn't realize she was into spanking until she was 19. And as someone who knew that I was into spanking at the age of 5, that seems wild to me. But Flora is definitely into spanking. I mean, it would be kind of weird for her to be my girlfriend and my baby girl / submissive if she weren't. And as she's explored spanking more and more, she has realized that this is where she feels most comfortable and most at home. But Flora also has a vanilla boyfriend who she loves, and their relationship is super functional. Flora has had plenty of vanilla sex with various people and has had a grand time doing so, and pretty sure would happily do so again. I, by contrast, have never dated a vanilla, nor happily ever had vanilla sex. Nor do I ever really want to. Honestly, I kind of find the idea of sex without spanking to be like boring. It does not compute. Flora is therefore a preferred spanking fetishist. She prefers for her relationship and sexual encounters to involve spanking. She fantasizes about spanking and is clearly into spanking, but it isn't required for her to be happy. The last category of fetishes are optional fetishes. An optional fetish is any, say it with me now, sexual interest in an atypical object, situation, fantasy, or individual that this time you could literally take or leave. A lot of people have an optional fetish, and a lot of people have more than one. Do you find feet sexually attractive? That's a fetish. Do you find the idea of being tied up really hot? That's a fetish. What makes it optional is that you don't feel compelled to do something about it. It could be in addition to sex or a substitute for sex, but it's not required for you to experience sexual gratification. So, for example, I have a tickling fetish. I've been into tickling for a really long time and find parts of tickling really hot. And occasionally I will watch tickling porn or have tickling fantasies. But this is kind of a like once a year sort of thing. It's something I think about occasionally. And it's an interest that I've dabbled in with partners, but I've never explored it on its own because I don't feel like I need to, or even like I really want to. Like, it'd be really fun, but it's optional. A lot of times someone might look at that and think, well, that's not a fetish at all then. But it definitely is. A typical person, like a vanilla non-fetishist, does not find tickling sexually gratifying. They are not going to be able to find tickling porn hot. It is an atypical sexual interest. It's just not a strong one for me. So, to recap, we have optional, preferred, and obligatory fetishes. Optional, you could take or leave. Prefer, you'd prefer to have, but could technically live without. And obligatory are a genuine must-have that can reach the level of sexual orientation. Now, with that framework in mind, can you see why people who define as kinky versus people who define themselves as fetishists can get into such heated debates about things? In general terms, I found that people who define themselves as fetishists are usually obligatory fetishists, people for whom their fetish is their entire sexual orientation. And in general terms, I've found that people who define themselves as kinky are people who may have one or multiple optional and or preferred fetishes. So Let's say you're an obligatory spanking fetishist trying to articulate how platonic discipline spanking is your sexual orientation and your entire sexuality. And someone with an optional spanking fetish is going to look at that and be like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is also why people who I would describe as broadly kinky will sometimes say that they feel that fetishists are elitist or gatekeeping or act like we're better than them. And I really think that this is just an issue of language. There is nothing wrong with having an optional fetish. As I've said, I have some. Many people do. And there's nothing wrong with having an obligatory fetish. And they are both fetishes, but they are not the same thing. And we need to be able to have the language to be able to articulate that. I know that I may be into tickling and even remember thinking about it when I was really young. I may be able to share that experience with someone who is an obligatory tickling fetishist, but I don't know what it feels like to have tickling be the entirety of my sexuality. I don't know what the experience of trying to find a tickling partner would be like. And it would be unfair of me to try to speak for that community just because I find tickling hot. Similarly, it's frustrating when someone is like, oh yeah, I like spanking. I have a spanking fetish. I'm the same as you. When what they like is a smack on the ass during sex, or they like once a year want to do a school roleplay spanking scene. That person's interest in spanking or in whatever is 100% valid, but it's not the same as my interest. My interest is not better, it's just different. Speaking just to spankos for a minute here, we have some bad habits about this. We like to litmus test people about how much of a true spanko they are. Did they look spanking up in the dictionary as a kid? Are they into platonic discipline spankings or just sexual spankings? Are they a proper spanko? And some of that comes from a genuine place of wanting to be able to relate to another obligatory fetishist and to share the same interest and same experiences. It comes from having felt dismissed or not understood, perhaps in a different kinky context. It can come from a feeling of protectiveness, of wanting to keep a space precious. But it can often just be gatekeeping in a way that really isn't helpful. Because all of this is complicated. Flora and her preferred spanking fetish are just as valuable as I am with my obligatory spanking fetish. We just have to acknowledge that we aren't coming at spanking from entirely the same place. There are also people who have obligatory fetishes that are more conceptual than something like spanking or tickling or feet or whatever. For example, I have some dear friends who are obligatory fetishists in humiliation, shame, cruelty, and pain. And each of them is someone that I met in the spanking community. They all either have optional or preferred spanking fetishes and an obligatory fetish that has no specific action. So they've matched up these fetishes and found a happy pairing. Like a humiliation fetishist could potentially be fulfilled in many different ways, and spanking is one of them. Same with a sadist. Pain can come in a variety of different forms. So no, that friend of mine didn't grow up thinking about spanking every second that they had like I did. But they're also not somebody who could just go on a vanilla date one day and have vanilla sex and be fine. All of this is to say we are all equally valid in our own experiences. All fetishists are equally worthy and valuable, but all fetishes are not the same. And having the language to articulate that, I think, is so important. So, hi, I'm Kelly. I'm an obligatory spanking fetishist. And as a result, I consider my fetish to be my sexual orientation. Tell me about yourself in the comments down below. How do you think you would classify your spanking fetish or any other fetishes that you might have? What do you think of this format? Do you find it as helpful as I do? Subscribe if you aren't subscribed already. I make no promises about when videos will come, but I will say I have a couple in the works. Thank you to everyone for all your continued support, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Until then, class dismissed. Okay, apparently we're filming. So this is the 4th time I'm trying to film this. And now somebody has decided that they want to do lawn work when my mic is broken. It's a delight. Love that for me. Love that for us. All right, let's give this a go.